let me make it clear, my opinion is worthless because I'm not a neuroscientist, and I've never yet succeeded at building general AI. But I don't believe a lot of the details of the neuron are important for consciousness or thinking or the things the brain does. I think the main thing is frequency of the firing of the axon. I don't think the refactoring period is a critical part of our intelligence. I think it's something our brains work around. I don't think the fact that they need blood and a waste disposal process and all that is necessary. I think that's just part of the mechanisms of a cell. What really seems to matter for intelligence, I believe, is what's called the connectome. And the connectome is just basically the topology and the big structure of the connections of all the neurons and the synaptic weights that dictate how each neuron affects the other neurons. And if you have the whole connectome mapped out, then I think in theory we could sort of maybe upload our consciousnesses into simulations, and then we'd have humans in software, and yay, wouldn't that be awesome? Of course, in reality, we're all affected by the chemical goings-ons inside of the neurons, and who knows, maybe there's quantum processes in there, and maybe there's actually a soul that's driving a little joystick paddle around in every single one of the neurons. We don't know, we can't prove any of that stuff. But it appears, based on a whole lot of evidence, that the thing that matters is the rate of firing of the axons and the connections and the synapses, which are basically the weights. Yeah.
Do you happen to know, just like off chance, like how big artificial neural net, like the biggest ones are compared to like how many slings you have?
Yeah, okay. Let's see. I think there's a Wikipedia article on the number of neurons in the brain. There we go. Let's go for that one. List of animals by number of neurons. There's a fun one. Okay. A sponge, 0. Sponges are dumb. Or rather than dumb, what they are is they're mechanical, meaning they operate, they just do what they do. Okay. They don't think about it. The C. elegans nematode roundworm. This is a really interesting one. It doesn't have a lot of neurons in its body, but we've actually mapped them all out. We've sequenced its genome, and we've simulated the whole darn thing. And that's really cool. In fact, I want to talk more about that. In fact, okay, I got to show you this. Openworm.org. If you go to openworm.org, yes, they're looking for donations. Here's a video of a worm, sort of. I guess we could debate, is that acting like a worm? Well, it's squiggling kind of like a worm. It goes into the corner, flips around, seems like it is. This is not real water, this is simulated particle physics. That thing that you're looking at is actually a fully simulated life form based on its own nervous system. It doesn't have a central nervous system, so we couldn't really say it has a brain. It just has a few neurons scattered throughout its body. And this is about as far as we can get. It does seem to behave like a worm, but some of that is the physics of its body, not necessarily the intelligence of its nervous system. And I think that's kind of cool because this thing's entirely in simulation, and hey, we can play God with this thing, right? We can stop the simulation. We can change the things going on in its own mind. We could, put it in different situations, and there's nothing it can do about it because we own the simulation. And we can duplicate it and all the things that you have to go all sci-fi about to imagine. What if there's a being running us in a simulation? Jellyfish, still nervous systems, but not a centralized brain. They're really just neurons that help it detect when there's stimulus around its body, and it responds to the stimulus it gets. I think fruit flies we're starting to see they actually have a head. They have a central nervous system. We're starting to get into actual creatures. Okay, let's scroll way down. And the winner is... Wow, there's a lot of them. There didn't used to be this many on this page. The African elephant is the smartest creature on the earth. Smarter than humans. Unfortunately, this is actually a representation of just the number of neurons estimated in the cerebral. No, this is the number of neurons estimated in the entire body. Yes, elephants have more neurons than we do, but they don't have more neurons in their cerebral cortexes, which are what we believe make us smart. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Basically, suffice it to say, African elephants have big bodies, and it takes a lot of nerves to reach all over the body. So a lot of those neurons are not actually thinking neurons, they're communication neurons. To draw an analogy, what is the brain of planet Earth? It's the internet, isn't it? It's totally the internet. I mean, we're totally communicating with each other over the internet. Who are the neurons? I don't know, maybe they're us or our computers or something like that. But a lot of the internet is devoted to passing messages onward, routers and connections. How much of the internet is actually generating cat videos or whatever the Earth is thinking about at the moment? In an elephant, a lot of the neurons are just a big long chain that connect throughout the body. This is what we call a nerve. And so when the brain says move, it says to the next neuron, move, 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 and it sends the signal all the way down to the feet, and then the feet move. Or the muscles, rather. Okay. What's that?
You don't really have to change the neurons. The axons actually, so there are axons that are connected to the cell bodies in the brain that go all the way to the feet. The axons are single cell.
It's a single cell that stretches that far?
Yeah, single cell processes that stretch throughout the whole body. That's why spinal cord injuries are so hard to heal. Once you cut the spinal cord, all of the axon past the point of the injury dies. That's called Wallerian degeneration, and it all dies, and it's really hard to replace.
Sweet. I love finding people that know more than I do. Thank you for chiming in. And please keep me accurate here, because I don't really know neuroscience very well.
I mean, there are neurons, like there are spinal neurons, spinal ganglions that do have cell bodies, and they do have their own axons as well. So there are sort of like that, but there are also single axons that go through the whole body.
Okay. If we take the number of neurons in the cerebral cortex, it turns out the long-finned pilot whale is the smartest creature on Earth. Don't know what to think about that. Feel a little bit trumped, but humans have more than just about everything else that walks on land. And as far as we know, we're the smartest creatures around because, hey, where's the long-finned pilot whale internet and hospitals and schools of learning? I don't know, but then again, according to Douglas Adams, the aliens came for them before blowing up the Earth. Maybe he was onto something. I don't know. It's fun to poke around Wikipedia and pretend it knows stuff. But in the end, these are just counts of neurons. Is that even correlated with intelligence? I don't know, but it's fun to think about. Here's what I know of the structure of the brain. And again, good chance I'm going to get it wrong, so this is my best attempt to.
Just wanted to comment because you're talking about, cell counts. So most of the neurons in the brain are actually all in that little cerebellum, that little small bulb in the back. Because the cerebellum has these things called, what are they called? It has these special neurons, granule cells, these special, very small neurons, so it has many, many, many of them. But then again, it's also considered to be not a very smart part of the brain, even though it has a lot of neurons.
Okay, cool. Here's a brain diagram. And everybody knows there's two hemispheres, right? Between the hemispheres is the corpus callosum. In fact, there's some really interesting things with the corpus callosum. Have you ever heard of epileptic patients? They sometimes get their corpus callosum severed. And one of the reasons they do that is that suppresses epileptic seizures. Have you ever Googled for corpus callosum? Of course you haven't.
Split brain people?
There are split brain people. Weird stuff happens. The split brain people have the ability to draw different things with their different hands because their two sides of their brain are controlling the different hands and they don't interfere with each other. Whereas normal people just can't do it because messages pass over the corpus callosum and they get you confused and you can't draw a square while drawing a triangle with your other hand. It just is too hard. In fact, you ever tried the thing where you sit on a chair and you spin your leg clockwise and then you draw the number 6 in the air, and when you're done, your leg's going counterclockwise? It's a weird neuroscience trick because apparently your mind can't handle that concept. Seriously, try it. Move your leg, rotate in clockwise circles, draw the number 6, and tell me if your leg didn't get screwed up in the process. Isn't that weird? Okay, anyway, that has nothing to do with this. 3 really major parts of the brain. You've got the cerebral cortex. It's this big area over here. Cortex means skin, and it's kind of this skin layer that fits over the main big part of your brain. This area down here, the cerebellum, is where most of the neurons in your brain are, but nevertheless, the cerebral cortex is believed to be the part mostly responsible for your awareness, your consciousness, your thinking, and things like that. Basal ganglia, in fact, let me point out these 3 things. Cerebellum is believed to operate in a manner that's analogous with supervised learning, which is what we've been working on so far. Cerebral cortex operates using an approach called unsupervised learning, which I'm planning to talk about a lot more for the rest of this semester. And the basal ganglia uses a learning approach that's been found to be analogous with reinforcement learning. So interesting that the direction that computer science has gone has uncovered 3 major approaches to learning, and then after the fact, we've gone back and discovered those same approaches in biological brains. What does this mean? I don't know, but it kind of suggests that the field of computer science may be evolving in the same directions or analogous directions as the brain seems to have evolved. It suggests that we're to a large extent on the right track in sorting out intelligence, and I tend to believe strongly that we are, much more than a lot of other researchers who would argue otherwise. So if you talk to me, I lean very heavily towards optimistic, transhumanist type stuff. And, well, that's just my attitude. If you were to look at a brain, they're ugly and gray, right? No.
They're red because there's a lot of blood in them.
Yeah, they're red because there's a lot of blood in them. If you drain the blood, then they're going to be a lot of gray. If you rip off the skin, they're white underneath, which is kind of interesting because, well, let me explain why that is. I can't even spell neuron right. Neuron. And I'll look at, okay, here's another hyper-simplified representation of a neuron. There's the soma, there's the axon. Notice these blobs on the axons. These are those glia?
Those are myelin sheaths.
They are myelin sheaths. That's what I meant. Glia is something else. Myelin sheaths are basically a bunch of cholesterol. You know how if you have a wire, it's usually wrapped in plastic? Why? So that the electrical signal doesn't leak out of the plastic and get into other wires, right? Well, axons have the same problem. As the brain gets more and more dense, if you have too many axons running around and they touch each other, you get signals crossing over the wrong ways. Bad things happen. Myelin is basically this fat that protects the axon signal and makes it so you can condense all these neurons together into a brain without major problems. This fatty stuff is white. The somas tend to be grayish in color if you look at them. So if you had a blood-drained brain, where's my brain? There's this layer of gray on the outside and underneath is all white. What that means is there tend to be all the neurons in your brain are kind of on this surface, which is what we call a cortex. And so there's the surface of neurons where we believe the thinking really happens. And then there's these big fat cables that just all plunge down into the meat of the brain, I should say the fat of the brain, because they're all covered in these myelin sheaths. So if you ever go to a data center, you've got the computers, and then you've got just fat wads of cables all bound up in zip ties or whatever they're bound together in. You could think of it as though the computing neurons are all on the surface of your cerebral cortex, the cortex of the skin, And then there's all these cables that run down through it, presumably to connect various neurons to other neurons throughout the brain. One other evolutionary innovation of the human brain is all these wrinkles. If you cut open a mouse brain, you'll see it's actually this nice smooth thing. By virtue of having a lot of wrinkles, since we have the somas all in a cortex, all in this layer on the surface, if you have a lot of wrinkles, you actually fit more surface into the same amount of brain. Does that make sense? So it's believed that the wrinkles have two beneficial effects. One is more surface area for more cortex, meaning more somas, more neurons. The other is, hey, now they're also closer to each other, so you can have little axons that cut across them without having to have super long axons. However, the vast majority of your brain, if you actually rip off the cortex, is fat. And the reason it's fat is it's these sheaths that are protecting the signals from crossing over and interfering with each other. There are a lot of brain problems caused by decay of the myelin sheaths. Like, does Alzheimer's do that? I think Alzheimer's is plaques. I think MMS, not MS, multiple sclerosis. One of those diseases, I don't remember which one, basically causes your myelin sheaths to decay. And once they do, then your brain loses some of its functionality, because even though the brain sends correct signals, they get crossed over and they cause problems because you've lost the insulation around the wiring. Okay, there's a bunch of lobes in the brain, and people have studied what they all do. Basically, I should look up a chart and show you. In the very back is responsible for vision, which is kind of funny because your eyes are in the front. There's this optical, what's it called? The optical pathway that runs from your eyes back to the back of your brain where they process images. There's an interesting pattern that has been observed in the visual cortex, meaning this part in the back of your brain that processes vision. And that is that, I suppose these are the neurons. All of the neurons are connected with high likelihood to nearby neurons, but there's not a lot of axons that are running across the whole thing to faraway neurons. Can you see what that has to do with convolution? So in convolution, we're kind of applying this filter across the whole input image. And we're suggesting, so imagine, if you will, that there's this optical pathway coming in, and each of these spatially located neurons are connected to the retinal cells in the back of your eye. Well, by virtue of the fact that as they go through layers, I haven't talked about layers yet. Well, the point is they're all connected to nearby ones and not too far away ones. Based on this, it has been argued by LeCun, who invented convolutional neural nets, that the brain seems to do convolution to images. That is, we detect edges and curves and corners and bends really well, because that's what convolution is good at in image processing, because our neurons are connected in a sort of spatial manner in the visual cortex. In other parts of the brain, we don't see that same operation. And so it's kind of believed that there's probably fully connected type of thinking going on all over the place, but in the visual cortex, there's more convolutional type of thinking going on. And that's totally consistent with the way convolutional layers and neural networks seem to be really effective at digesting images, whereas fully connected layers are really effective at digesting other stuff.